Welcome to Maisie's Classroom. Today we have part 2 in our nature series. If you haven't already seen part 1, please go back and have a look at our maths numeracy focus. Today we've got a literacy focus with oral language. What I see in the classroom is that some children come to school without the skills to be talking about oral language. And so we need to support that skill development. And one way we can do that is using our 5 senses. So how do things feel? How do they look? What sound do they make? How do they smell? And how do they taste? Now make sure before kids taste anything that you've given the okay and they've checked with you before they go ahead and do that. First, what we have from our nature elements is this feather. So kids can go ahead and start feeling and use some describing words like soft and fluffy and hard down the middle to describe how it feels. Make sure that they're using full sentences to you and using lots of descriptive words to get that oral language up. How does it look? Well, it looks very fluffy and the colours are grey, and you can see that it's shiny when the light bounces off it. How does this feather sound? By itself, this feather does not make any sounds, but children, depending on their age, may recognise that feathers come from a bird and start talking about bird sounds, which is perfectly okay. How does this feather smell? Children of all ages will be very keen to get things up and around their nose to see how they smell, so encourage that and encourage them to describe what they smell. And taste. It's not particularly hygienic to taste a feather, so we might move on to the next item. What I have here is a basil leaf. This basil leaf feels very soft. You can feel that it's shiny on one side and more dull on the other, which brings us to how does it look? Well, it looks very green. Again, it's dull on one side and it looks more shiny on the next side. How does it sound? When we scrunch a basil leaf, it makes some noises, but it doesn't make those noises all on its own. How does it smell? Basil is a very distinctive smell of a herb, and children might recognize that from something that you've cooked before. Again, with how does it taste? You can encourage children to taste things like herbs. The next natural items we have is this stick and this bark. Now they feel very rough and bumpy. How do they look? Well, their colour is dark with some lighter colours on the inside. Again, they look very bumpy and rough. How do they sound? You might encourage children to bump things together to get them to make a sound. How do they smell? Depending on which tree they came from, that will change the smell and the description of that. And how do they taste? Once again, it might not be particularly hygienic to taste bark and sticks, but encourage children to use their imaginations on how the tree might once have tasted. Now we've got some different type of leaves here, and these are dead leaves. So the feel is very different to our fresh basil leaf. It feels crunchy and rough. How do they look? Well, kids might say they look dead, but we want to be encouraging them to say why they look dead. So we can see that the colours are brown and grey, and the bark here looks more like a stick. How do they sound? They sound very crunchy, and you can encourage children to describe the sound that they make when they crunch them between their fingers. How do they smell? This leaf is from a eucalyptus tree, so you can encourage children to recognise that smell and tell you where else they might have smelt that before. Same for taste as our previous items. And finally, we have some rocks. Now I've got 2 different types of rocks here that feel very different. One is smooth around the edges, and one is smooth on one side but sharp around the edges. How do they look? One of these rocks is a sandy brown colour. The other one has white on the front and a darker grey on the back. How do they sound? They make sounds again once you put them together. How do they smell? I'm predicting that these rocks will smell a bit like dirt because that's where I picked them up from. And taste, we probably don't want to be tasting rocks. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for part 3 in our nature series, all on science. I'd love to know in the comments below what items you found in your backyard and what descriptive words you use to describe them using your 5 senses. Now you know, go and play.